This video we talk about finding slope. We can find slopes from equations, we can find them from tables, and we can find them from graphs. So here we start out with the equation, and we want to talk about how to find the slope. Well, we know one way to think about slope is the change in y over the change in x. And that's the basic premise of what slope is. So I need to know some x's and y's. Well, right now I can look at -1 and 0, and I can see that to get from -1 to 0 I added 1. And from this is going to be my change in x. And over here I'm going to look at my change in y because these are the y values. So y is equal to -4, and then the next time y is equal to -2, and to get from -4 to -2 I had to add 2. So we know that the change in y then is 2. So down here in that row, the change in x was 1, the change in y was 2, and so the change in y over the change in x would be 2 over 1, or it's just simply 2. So let's see what happens if we continue on and see if we get the same slope. Y is equal to 2, we're evaluating 2 times 1 minus 2, and that's 2 minus 2, so that will give me 0. Change in x over here, again we added 1, and then change in y over here, again we added 2. So change in x is 1, change in y is 2, and change in y 2 over change in x 1, again is 2. One more. Y is equal to 2, evaluate for 2, so 2 times 2, minus my 2 that's already there, and that's going to be 4 minus 2, so that will give us a 2. So now in my change in x from 1 to 2 I added 1. So change in x is 1. And from 0 to 2 I added 2. So my change in y is 2. And again, change in y 2 over change in x 1 gives me a 2. Now here's a little clue for later, but we're going to find out when you look at this equation, this 2, I know there's two 2's there, but specifically this 2 is going to end up being our slope. You might have heard of y equal mx plus b. M is another way to write slope. So m is equal to slope. So when you have an equation, you can actually tell what the slope is if it's y equal just by looking at it. Now let's go and look at a table. So we could do the same thing. In fact, we're going to do it two ways here. -2 to -1 we added 1. -1 to 0 we added 1. 0 to 1 we added 1. So on the change in x we always have 1. And from 11 down to 7 it looks like we subtracted 4. 7 down to 3 it looks like we subtracted 4. And again 3 to -1 we subtracted 4. So the change in y is going to be equal to -4. So the change in y over the change in x is going to be -4 over 1, or -4. Now, there's also a formula that says m, which we now know to be slope, is equal to y2 minus y1, change in y, over x2 minus x1, change in x. Notice I always went from in the table from the one down to the next one, down to the next one. I was always using the same order. So I started with -2 in the x, I started with 11 in the y. So we have to do the same thing. These 2's up here being on top of each other is important. Now it's also, I will say that it's also equivalent to y1 minus y2. Doesn't matter which order we subtract them in, but if I start with y1, I have to start with x1. So if we do that, let's do these middle two. So y2, I have the point -1, 7, and this is x1 and x2. I mean y1, they're both 1's because they're the same point. 0, 3 is going to be x2 and y2. So if I use my formula, y2 is 3 minus y1, which is 7. And x2, remember I have to start here, is 0, and I subtract my x1, which is -1, which is really adding 1. So 3 minus 7 is 4. 0 plus 1 is 1. Actually, 3 minus 7 is -4. 0 plus 1 is 1, and I get a slope of -4. One last final problem then. We're looking at a graph. How can we find the slope of a line from a graph? Again, it's a change in y over the change in x, and really it's a visual kind of. So I see this point right here looks really nice because it goes through the grid marks right at a point. And this one right here is nice, so is this one, and so is this one. So I could pick any of those points. But let's take these first two. And we go from left to right. And I want to know, what did I do going from left to right? Well, to get from this point to this point, this way, up and down, I went up 2. Up 2. Which means that y is equal to positive 2 because I went up. And this, I went right 1, which means that x is equal to 1. Positive 1. So it's actually the change in y and the change in x. So I'm thinking that my slope is change in y, 2, over change in x, 1, or just 2. What would happen if I would come from this point and I didn't see that this one was a nice point, so I not accidentally, it doesn't matter which 2 points we pick, but I went this way. Okay, let's do it again. Let's change our color here. So I want to do, what did I do from this point down here, the leftmost point, up to the rightmost point? I went up, and I went up 1, 2, 3, 4. So the change in y is equal to 4. And then from left to right, I went right from this point here. After I went up, I'm at this point and I went over 2 more. So I went right 2, so the change in x is equal to positive 2. So that says m is 4 change in y over 2 change in x, but 4 over 2 reduces to 2. Same answer. Now, could I have just picked the 2 points and found the ordered pairs and done the slope formula? Yes. There's more than one way often to do a problem,